For your lunchtime entertainment, we are going to have a presentation that just sort of summarizes the 2023 State of the Space Industrial Base report. And with that, Peter Garretson, who is a senior fellow in defense studies with the American Foreign Policy Council and co-directs the Space Policy Initiative and host of the Space Strategy podcast, and the editor of the 2023 State of the Space Industrial Base report, will be moderating with those three guys over there that are not paying attention. So he'll be moderating with Bucky Butow, who we introduced earlier, the director of the space portfolio at the Defense Innovation Unit. Also, we're joined by Dr. Andy Williams, Deputy Technology Executive Officer for Space at AFRL, and Dr. AJ Metcalf, the Space Enterprise Engagement Lead for AFRL. Do you need an extra one? Okay. And for all of you, don't leave. Every year we take a picture. And so after this panel, we're going to be, I believe, going to that corner to take, or actually probably that corner works better. We'll be congregating at that screen for a 2024 SSIB picture.
All right, so just to scope a bit of expectations, we are going to talk about last report, but in context, and we're not going to go line by line. So if you're really interested in seeing what was in the report, I encourage you to download the report and see it. It is a pretty substantial yearbook of what transpired in the previous year, and it has a plethora of important recommendations, not only in the main section, but in the individual sections that might be of interest to you. But let's start the discussion by paging a little bit about, so what is the history of this series of reports? How did it come to be, and why do we have it at all?
In 2015, I want to say it was Joel Mosier's idea, but we were having a lot of engagements with the commercial sector, not just through DIU, but also through AFRL. And we were learning things that were not widely known in the government. And the first workshop that we did, and we hosted it in Mountain View at our office at DIU. But the theme was really kind of focused on foreign ownership, control, and influence. And we were getting testimonials from companies about how aggressive other actors were about trying to get their IP access things or do blocking type of things economically to try to put those companies at a disadvantage, stress them out, and then acquire them. And so we took all those testimonials and we put it together in a report, and it was pretty surprising because we wound up having an audience with people in Congress, on the administration, and within a few months there was a lot of action to try to go after taking care of that issue.
Any additions from the AFRL side and your perspectives on this? Good with Bucky's answer?
Always.
So, then the next question, that sort of bridges off that is, obviously the report is written for an audience. So, what is the report meant to do, and who is it meant to inform?
So I think the big focus, or the first thing to make clear, is that while those of us on the stage are listed as the co-authors or editors of the report, this is not a report that comes from the government, right? This is really a report that is a product of this and other engagements that comes from data from the community that's trying to truly understand all the different perspectives that we have within the space industrial base, not just the government piece, not just the industry, the industrial based piece, not just the commercial piece, all of the pieces. And maybe we don't get a lot of academic representation, but that is one piece that we need to consider as well. And AFRL does some of that representation from an S&T perspective. But the real purpose is to try to have a no kidding understanding and an annual report card and report that we can track so that we can actually see what we're doing, what are the issues, how well are we addressing some of those issues. And we do it every year so that we can have a historical record. And so we can say, you know, back in 2016, we said that regulation was a huge problem and it was really slow. And guess what? 2024, it's still a huge problem. It's still really slow. So maybe we haven't made very much progress in that. But maybe back in 2016, we said, you know, commercial government investment integration, that's not really working well either. And in 2024, we released a DoD, a Space Force, commercial strategy. So maybe we've actually made some improvement there. And so the focus is really to have an annual review, an annual dialogue, an annual discussion, start creating that database of information that we can start maybe bringing analytical tools, whether that's actually machine learning tools or whatever we need to, but actually have a historical archive so we can see how well we're doing. And then how well do we communicate within the space industrial base? And then how well do we communicate externally? Because Congress does read this, as Bucky mentioned, right? That was one of the first audiences. And so how do we have that engagement, that dialogue and the discussion? And that's really the purpose of what we're doing here and the purpose of the report, not to be a government bureaucratic report, but a report built by the industry for the industry to have those discussions and dialogue.
Anybody want to add to that? Any further thoughts? So then the question is, of course, you know, one of the audiences are often in the recommendations, both AFRL and DIU are called out as to take action. So how does AFRL and DIU make use of the report itself?
From an AFRL perspective, we use it to really help inform investment decisions. We all deal with limited resources, limited budgets, and so we can't spend as much money on everything that we would love to spend money on. I think if you give money to an S&T person, they'll be like, yeah, I could do that, and then I could do this after that too. So give me more money. But we don't live in that type of a world. And so we have to make strategic decisions on what is it that AFRL is actually going to invest in order to maximize the return on what we're spending. And so we look at that from a perspective as what is commercial working on that is going to address both commercial and military applications that maybe we don't need to spend as many dollars on, and what is not being spent in the commercial marketplace that does have a military but potentially not a commercial aspect. And so maybe we should shift money from one area that's going to be handled more by commercial and shift that to more military focus. So it does inform our investments. We also look at those areas where maybe we need a mix of commercial and military investment in order to accelerate or springboard a technology, and to try to provide specific examples of what we've done, right? With the growing interest and funding, venture capital funding that has been going into space access for the last few years, we decided that maybe we should de-emphasize some of the S&T research that we're doing in space access. At the same time, we saw a growing interest in space logistics for dynamic space operations and also potential commercial applications. And so one of the internal discussions we've had is, do we take some of that funding out of our space access portfolio and shift that portfolio, that funding more into space logistics for OSAM related activities, so that we can make sure that we accelerate and we are world's leaders in that area and we stay world leaders in that area. The drone example was given earlier where we were a world leader and then we weren't. So that's an area where we look at leveraging the report and the information within the report in order to make our funding decisions. And then the last piece I want to highlight as well is that AFRL does execute the Mantech portfolio on behalf of the Department of the Air Force as well. And so from an industrial base, resiliency, sustainability, from a perspective of what are the things that we think we need to fund in for robustness to meet the oncoming demand, we do have a Mantech portfolio that we can fund those types of activities. So when we look at proliferation of LEO, when we're looking at like the missile warning constellations, we did some analysis on, and we identified one of those things that we should probably spend more Mantech funding on is focal plane arrays, so that we can make sure that we are producing focal plane arrays at the quality and the capacity that we need to meet the demand. And so that is one of those things that came out of discussions within the SSIB, that came out in the report, and portfolio decisions that we made within AFRL.
I'll add on to that. So maybe less formally, just understanding industry's pain points, especially with communicating with the government, that and how we share information with you and how you understand what we're going after and how do you get in touch with the right people within our organizations, and just understanding those pain points has changed the structure internally to AFRL. We've stood up new offices. We have people that look across to AFRL now for specific mission areas in space that you can contact to get to the right people. And that's a result of the report and meetings like this.
I like the yearbook analogy earlier because the working groups help identify homework for organizations like DIU. And then, so that's part of the story. But it also gives us an opportunity to kind of tell what's been accomplished or what's underway, so that it really kind of closes the circle. And I think that's really important. And the report is obviously an evolving thing. And I have to apologize. The reason it got out 6 months later than we had originally hoped this year is because we were mired in this whole DIU 3.0 strategy rework of our organization. But it's all good. I think I think in terms of that, I like Megan's focus on problems. So if we focus on problems and identify what are some potential solutions, where DIU sits is that we have some money allocated by Congress to go after and do prototyping and to build a menu of potential solutions. But that's only part of the story. The lab, AFRL has the ability to take that step and experiment, test and validate capabilities, right? Working with others, or to actually put out even more specific things that I love the aperture idea, because then that scale, because now that's the type of thing that can get fueled and done in industry very quickly. But and there's a part of the report which is somewhat aspirational, right? It's what's the long view? It's like, why go to space anyways? And I think that's good because the target audience is not the space goobs, in government and in industry. It's really if you look at the cross section of Congress, most of those people are not really familiar with space, or they don't know that the commercial sector is growing exponentially, and these things are important. So it's an opportunity to educate others outside of the defense or aerospace community about what's going on here.
So that's a good lead in. So, by my count, we've had 5 reports and we're now in our 6th year now. So each of you has had an opportunity to sort of look across those, that movie of time, those snapshots. What sort of stands out to you as major themes, recurring themes over the time frame of this report?
Well, I'll try that. So this, anticipating this question, this morning I took all those documents and put them in a little AI algorithm and asked it to try and find the themes over the years. Didn't have a lot of time to kind of hone in and tweak it, but this is what popped up. The importance of working with allies and partners as an issue, the regulatory and political obstacles that continue to remain, ITAR, continuing resolutions. Unity across government, getting to a common vision. So I think that is, we have a bunch of government agencies and we don't always work together. And I think at least a few years ago, I remember a big push was, you're going out this way, DIU, AFRL, you're going in this direction, NASA's going in this direction. Why don't we come together? So that was a theme AI picked up on. The importance of STEM education, increased transparency and more agility on the government side. Need to invest in cutting edge tech. And this is funny because it specifically said AI is foundational in this. So it's self-promoting. Over the years from 2019 to 2023, it said one thing has become more prominent, and that is the urgency and agility needed in addressing the threats. So it noticed more urgency in just the rhetoric and the wording over the 5-year period. And finally, what's new? The only thing it determined was new in the newest report was innovation through experimentation as a new push and increased access to space.
I think that's an interesting, because my answer would be participating in this event for the last 4 or 5 years, that the common theme that I always see is speed, resiliency, and then trust and robustness in the industrial base. That's something that I think has been a forefront of discussion in the last 3 or 4 years that I've participated. And I think we've made some positive advancements in some of those areas. I think what Space Development Agency has been doing and the approach that they've been taking from a government perspective has been hugely positive in showing how we can do things differently, how we can follow Mr. Calvelli's tenets, how we can change the paradigm, and they've had a lot of success in that. You know, they've taken a lot of arrows as a result of that too, but I do think it shows that the government can change when motivated and we have the right people in the right places doing the right thing. So I think we've made some positive strides there, and the commercial space strategies is another good example of some positive strides, but I think there's still a lot of examples of things that are still painful. The regulatory piece is still there. Frequency allocation is always a huge problem from an AFRL perspective. I don't think it's any better for anybody else. So I think there's a lot of work that we still need to work on, and that's been a common theme and a major theme that's going on. So I do think that we've made positive strides, but there is still a lot of work that we need to do.
So the one, I'm surprised the AI didn't pull up on it, but the North Star vision, right? And the interesting thing, I believe it's been in every report, but I'm not sure, but some version of it. And it's always funny because when I meet with senior leaders in the department, they're going, you know, we're just trying to like deter conflict and like go after like really tough problems, you know, Ukraine and other places. It's like, what's with this whole North Star vision thing? And I think this is a very important, at least, and I know if you know, Major General John Olson was here today, he's unfortunately couldn't make it, but we've had a lot of philosophical discussions about this. It's a very powerful thing for us to walk in the door of a company like SpaceX that really wants to do all this to get to Mars, right? And to make humanity a multi-planet species. And so for us to be able to walk in the door and say, we want to work with you, and we're pursuing this North Star vision, which is actually well aligned with what the goal of that company is, that opens more doors and opportunities than it closes it. You know, we can't deal with the outside world as the U.S. government and have our goals, you know, at 90 degrees offset from one another. It just doesn't work. it's almost like admitting we shouldn't work together. And I said US government, not DoD, because obviously NASA is working fervently on this, and as evidenced by the Artemis program. And so all these things that we do, they contribute to lots of different things, not just national security, but I mentioned economic security earlier today, technological security in terms of advantage, and then science and exploration on all these things, which ultimately, I know, at least for, I'd be surprised if it was different, but, being a product of the Apollo generation or the space shuttle generation, it just influenced a lot of us to pursue degrees in science, engineering, and math. And so I think it's good for us to be able to identify with that and spray a little bit of fuel on that fire from time to time.
So coming to this year's report, what are each of your favorite insights that was in this last year's report?
Okay, everybody's looking at me. I'll start with
Biggest takeaway.
much like a podcast where the video podcaster is really pleased if you watch the video all the way to the end. I always try to put a couple gold nuggets in the last section of the report, and Space Fund highlighted this earlier, this exponential growth. One of the things I wanted to highlight is that even though we have the largest budget in the department, and the U.S. government is really astute at most things on the science and technology, especially with space, we are absolutely horrible at forecasting. So I pulled the ComStack report from 2013, and they did a 10-year forecast of U.S. commercial space launch, and it was pretty bleak. They only had predicted for the year 2023 there would be 12 or 14 commercial launches, basically a launch a month, which in 2013 that was pretty ambitious. And of course that was completely blown out of the water. And of course, SpaceX was probably 90% of those launches, and not just in terms of number of launches, but also mass to orbit. But but it was good. And actually there was a really interesting exchange on X today, this morning, if anybody saw it, about some pushback about the New York Times article about how SpaceX is operating at everyone else's peril, and most of the non-traditional commercial space launch companies said that's not true, and even Elon chimed in on that. And so that's a great example of the competimates working together collectively to make sure that we have good narrative. But we don't, and that was just 10 years ago, right? So 10 years seems like a long time until 10 years has passed. And then, but there are things that are seedlings today that will become tomorrow's unicorns. And it'll do it because of all the things that Megan talked about this morning. But most importantly, they're just really, really, really good teams that solve really wickedly interesting problems and figure out how to do that a way at a scale and a cost point where we can't possibly not do business with them. And I think it's been a long time since we've had a commercial company sue the government to do business with it. And I'd also like to think that this is something that forums like this help to do, because all of us on the stage want to be people who can help define a path for interesting companies that have never done business with DoD or the Air Force or Space Force. To find a way to at least get some exposure and get some feedback, right? And I think that's really critical. So it's all part of that ecosystem, which is going to keep us in a leadership position for many years to come.
So for me, there's really two areas that I want to highlight. One is we've been talking about dynamic space operations, DSO, within the government for a while. I think a good thing that a report starts to do is to move or push that concept beyond what most people think of for dynamic space operations, which is maneuver. And I do think that's important from a military's perspective. Maneuver is important in every other warfighting domain. There's no reason why it won't be important in space. But that's just the physical maneuver part. I think for true dynamic space operations, we need to think bigger than that. And maybe I'm just the S&T guy thinking, future vision, but we have to think of what does it mean to have like a true logistics chain in space? How do we get to the age-old adage of amateurs talk tactics and professionals talk logistics? Space Force and the startup is still talking a lot about tactics. Let's start figuring out how do we start talking about logistics as well as we develop those tactics. And then we also need to be thinking of what dynamic space operations means, not just from a physical perspective, but from a digital perspective. That's, frequency allocation, frequent spectrum, being able to move across different spectrums, right? Being able to reallocate the networking piece to get data from point A to point B when, point C is no longer available. All of those things are going to be very dynamic in a future conflict. And the other thing that the report does is that it also pokes at not only do we actually need dynamic space operations in kind of a conflict aspect, but we need dynamic space operations from a industrial based perspective. If the Ukraine-Russia conflict has taught us anything, is that those are thinking adversaries, and that warfighting environment has changed dramatically from the beginning to what it is today. And there is innovation that is constantly occurring on the battlefield on a daily basis. What is that going to look like when we are in a pure conflict and space is involved? What does that look like? And how do we make sure that we have the industrial base that can support dynamic space operations where we have to constantly innovate and adapt to a thinking adversary? So that was one piece for me. And then the other piece that I want to highlight, frankly, is that I'm a Trekkie at heart. I grew up watching Star Trek. To date myself, I was a Next Generation kid. But we have to save the planet by getting off the planet was really something that kind of resonated with me, just because like I said, I'm a Trekkie at heart, but it also resonates with some of the things we've been doing on the Space Force that CTIO has been leading with their Space Future Workshop, their future foresighting concepts. The first one that they did, I don't know how many people were involved, but they looked at the extremes of the Star Trek future, where we are operating in space, we have economies in space, people are working in space on a day-to-day basis, and then the other extreme, which is dark skies, right? We can't use space, nobody's operating in space. And the question that we pose is what do we need to be doing today, now, that really gets us to an opportune glide path to get to that Star Trek future and not to that dark skies future? And I think that's a piece that really resonates between both the SSIB report and the work that CTIO has been doing with that future foresighting. And I think that's a good discussion that we should be having. What do we need to be doing today that's not just going to impact 2040, but 2060 and beyond? And I think all of these discussions we have with creating a commercial environment, what is the role of commercial and industry in that? What is the role of the government and the military in that? Are all great discussions to be having as we think through how do we get to that optimal future.
That was a lot of favorite nuggets. I can be much quicker. So one of the main things was allies and partnerships and the importance of that. This was the first year that we got insight from allies and I think 17 partner nations that were included in the report.
So, that you brought up roles. So I think it's good to have just a short discussion about where does AFRL, what is your place in this industrial based ecosystem? DIU, what's your place? And for the rest of you, while they're answering that, we're about to open it up for questions. So if you know you want a question while they're answering, just come on up here to the front so that I'm ready to call on you. Otherwise, I do have more questions. So it's your questions or mine.
From an AFRL perspective, I think we play an interesting role in the in the ecosystem, at least from an S&T perspective. We do some amount of in-house research where we're really looking at military hard problems, maybe longer term horizons that what most venture capitalists are interested in on return on investment. And we do have that role, but we also play a role in the ecosystem where we want to partner with industry and with commercial to start looking at how do we buy down risk of technologies and architectures that we want to move into. And that is, so we have a lot of the funding that we receive, we do put on contract, we do a lot of partnership, and that is because future programs of record are not going to buy capabilities from AFRL. They're not really going to buy it from any of the government service labs. They're going to buy it from industry. And so how do we partner to buy down the risk of those future capabilities that maybe venture capitalists are a little bit leery of because they're too high risk or because they're too long term? And how do we identify those and how do we work together? And so we really are trying to understand, and I think that's where we focus the AFRL piece, is in that partnership piece to accelerate, to create and buy down risk, and to eventually transition that technology into a program of record, because the technology that we invest in that sits on the shelf that never gets used is really useless. And so we try to avoid that as much as possible. But we also want to make sure that we're taking an appropriate amount of risk, and not everything that we do is 100% successful, because if it is, we're probably not leaning forward enough. And so that's a piece where AFRL plays in the overall ecosystem, is trying to find those future architectures and then partner with industry to make those architectures reality that will ultimately be bid back to programs of record that Space Systems Command, Space Development Agencies, Space RCO, that all of those acquisition organizations will ultimately be the ones that procure on behalf of the Space Force.
Bucky?
Yeah, actually, if you remember the graphic for the commercial integration strategy where it had the green blocks and the black blocks, I think what's interesting about that is we operate in different corners of that strategy, because the what I try to do at DIU and we're outside the fence line and like Silicon Valley and places like and Austin and Boston and Chicago and all these other areas, because what we really want to do is we want to help identify extremely early commercial companies that actually that they're not just commercial companies because they self-declared themselves to be or self-identified as commercial companies, but because they really have a viable commercial business case and technology which is compelling for us to look at, and then try to bring those in. So I may be on that one side of the block, but the neat thing is that kind of information. There's a lot of government systems, and as Andy said, there's no commercial viability in developing some of this stuff if it's just for a system that will only be used in a military context. And there's still a green block there, but it's mostly a government thing, and integrating into a government thing as a green block is really, really tough. You can't do it unless you have to have a Sherpa or a guide, and that's not DIU, right? It's going to be people who are knowledgeable and read into those programs and can actually deliver that capability at speed and scale. Derek Turner again, he's showing exactly how that's done. And there's a little bit of broken glass there, but hey, you can't change things without having some some experiment and some failure. But there's a lot of success there, and that's actually really good. So if we've gone from like commercials, kind of like the black sheep in defense, to there's just different amounts of commercial in all the different things that we do, and that really helps us, because the amount of private capital that goes into these companies, your companies, there's no way that the government could ever match that. And so the government should absolutely leverage it and help just by being a good customer. We can't be the only customer though. That's really, really, really tough. And you probably wouldn't want to be the government is like your only customer, because that we're all nice, but you know, in aggregate, we could be really tough on all, you know, so.
So are there concerns from last year's report that are still really prominent in your minds today, or are there things that are sort of keeping you up late at night currently that you want to see reflected in this year's report?
For me, the biggest thing when anybody asks that question is the STEM workforce and the future workforce and the challenges that we're going to have with that. I think the competition that we have for scientists and engineers and for technologists is just going to get harder and harder. I think we're going to see a shrinking workforce that we have access to in the future. And so how do we mitigate that? How do we accelerate or enhance STEM at all levels to encourage? And how do we be competitive against what maybe flashier professions than what science and technology has been historically? I mean, space is exciting, but we're going to be in competition for the workforce. And so that needs to be at the forefront of everything that we do, because that's going to affect everybody, not just the government. It's going to affect industry, commercial. And the people that I talk to are already starting to feel that. And I think it's just going to get worse and worse as time progresses and we have a smaller population to pull from.
If you want to innovate fast, policy is the tripping hazard, right? So we've really doubled down on building out expertise and going after policy and other regulatory issues that they don't, you know, those things take time to work out. You can't, there's no rapid policy process. So it's really important. I would say, even if you don't think that the government's your customer, a good reason for a commercial company to want to engage with us through the front door or anyhow is just to be able to help identify future policy challenges, so we can get involved and try to help mitigate those and keep you going. That you cannot do those things in series. They have to be done in parallel. And if you have the greatest technology but you can't fly it, that's going to be a major risk area that can really affect you. So, and we've got some great test cases right now. We're doing, you know, we've got a goal right now to have a commercial sourced, you know, radioisotopic power source that we want to fly on a commercial rocket in 2027. Every time I bring it up with other people in the government, they start sweating. but we've been talking about this for a while, and talking is really helpful, because then we can start identifying what's the right way to do it, and actually be able to influence the design of those prototypes early on, so that we can have some success and get it off with timing that we want.
I sleep like a baby. I would say the STEM for the last 15 years or so, STEM has been something that's just on my mind. In my graduate group, there were 17 students all working on Department of Defense programs. There, in some way or another, there was 2 American citizens out of those 17. My 30 best friends growing up from college, undergrad, grad school, as a little kid, not a single one of those 30 people went into science and technology. All 30 of them make more money than I do. All right. So STEM, I think, is still a big issue that we need to address.
All right, last chance for questions. All right, with that, I think we will, all right.
This comes off AJ's last comment. If STEM is part of a market economy situation, why aren't engineers being paid more based on their scarcity?
Are you talking about government engineers or commercial engineers? Because, but I'm sorry, I meant as a joke. Yeah. Go ahead, AJ.
Oh, I do not have an
It's
answer for
great,
you.
and I'll address it, but I mean, it's teeing off that point. And we've been talking about this for years and years and years. And it hasn't, the market hasn't pushed it.
I'll start off because I think 2 years ago, when we first did our real deep dive into the STEM and workforce, one of the most successful programs had a very simple solution, which was you find kids and you give them a mentor, and you create something experiential that gets them fired up to pursue things. And so and all of us have our own stories, but I had a mentor, and I was in the getaway special era, right? When you could fly experiments on the space shuttle. You talk to other people who work for me, they had a mentor and they got to work on like a CubeSat in school, or it doesn't even have to be a prolonged thing. Maybe they got General C.Q. Brown, the chief of staff, chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He got an airplane ride when he was 14 years old, and that one experiential thing changed his outlook and focus. So there's a lot of things we could do, but resources are critical. And I would say this is that I think the commercial sector can absolutely do a lot more in this regard, and because open up your doors and bring a bunch of 8th graders in to see your facility, or to meet an astronaut, or go for a flight in an airplane or something like that, or give them an opportunity to have a summer job as a high schooler, or these types of things. Keep track of these people, and I think it's really a national crisis if you think about it. And this past year's report, we pulled the data out of the BEA, and our production of just aerospace engineers is flatlined over the last 5 years. Flatlined. You look at all the graphs today, you would think, oh, well, we should be having an exponential growth in engineers. It's not. It's flatlined. So we're producing and exporting engineers at a disproportional rate. Is probably the right answer. And quite honestly, because my kid just graduated from college. Fortunately, I had the post 9/11 GI Bill, but you look at the bills. Most of these people, they look at the cost of education. It's really disheartening. So there's a lot of things we could do, but maybe there's some little things we could do this next year to make some headway.
So my answer, and I'll try to keep it short because I know we're getting on time, is I think we're starting to see it now. I've seen it in the competition that I have from a government perspective, because I can't pay anymore, right? So it's harder and harder for me to compete. And I'll use Peter Wegner's quote because that's where I got it from. But he said, he's the one that informed me on this, is that we had the largest high school graduating class. I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago, that the US that we think the US will ever see, which means that we will have the largest graduating college class in the next year or two. So I think that is a bow wave that is coming, that is going to have lag, that we're going to start to see get exacerbated. And I think we will start to see that salaries go up and up and up. And what I will tell you from maybe the government experiences this a little bit earlier is that what we have seen in AFRL the last probably 5 or 10 years is we have a major hole in our mid-level engineers. We have senior level engineers that have been around and they've dedicated to AFRL, and we have some junior engineers that are coming in from college. But we have been a source of a lot of mid-career engineers to other parts of the enterprise. And it's fantastic for us because that means now we have people that love AFRL and other organizations, and that's great. But it also means that we have been forced to put engineers and scientists that maybe weren't ready for mid-level or senior level leadership positions in those positions, and have tried to mentor them, but that has been a huge challenge, and some have left because of that. And so I think we're starting to see it, and it's only going to get worse in the next few years. And hopefully we will see salaries rebound as a result and increase, but
And
who
with
knows?
that, we are at time. Thank you very much.